Hello, I'm Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz and welcome to another in our series of double shot interviews. That's where we grab a couple of cups of coffee, we talk to a minister or a CEO or someone who's doing some interesting thinking on the economy, finance, interest rates, whatever. And we sit down for 10 minutes and have a chat. Today I have Rick Boven here. He's a director of the New Zealand Institute, which I suppose you could call it as a think tank, an independent think tank. And they've just written a report called A Goal is Not a Strategy. It was co-written with Dan Bidois, is that how it's pronounced, and Catherine Harland, in which it looks at how New Zealand can adapt to the current situation in the world and its problems in getting the economy up and running. What was the conclusion you came to about New Zealand's economic problems?
I guess the most important conclusion comes from what is very well known, which is that labour productivity, low labour productivity, is the reason why New Zealanders are not as wealthy as some of the leading countries in the OECD in terms of prosperity. And when you look at that, what we found was that the productivity of the core export sectors that New Zealand has, that is agriculture and tourism, tourism being a source of foreign money, even though it's not an export sector itself, the productivity of those was not sufficient to lift New Zealand's productivity to rejoin the ranks of the wealthy countries. And therefore, we needed to look to a third sector. And the conclusion for us was that that third sector was niche manufacturing, information, communications, technology. And essentially what we're talking about is moving from commodity activities that are competing with low labour cost or otherwise advantaged countries into really high-value differentiated goods and services.
Why can't we just do more farming and have more cows and have more tourists come here? Won't that increase our income?
Well, there's different answers for the two of them. In the case of agriculture, most of the agricultural land is already in production, so the volume growth opportunity is not that huge. And then the other issue with agriculture is that although we're quite productive on the farm, by the time we take the agricultural commodity from the farm, transport it to a processing plant, process it, transport it to the wharf, ship it, take it into another country, get through the tariff barriers or whatever there might be in another country, get it into a supermarket, we're actually competing with someone who's just down the road and might well be subsidised. And so the earnings that we can get from those activities are somewhat capped. In the case of tourism, there are sectors within tourism that are good, but on average they're relatively low-skilled, relatively low-wage jobs, and we compete with relatively low-wage countries for international tourists. And so that means that, again, there'll be sectors in there that are segments in there that are really worthwhile, but on average it's not great for us.
Now, why don't we just do more of what we've been doing? The theory is, since the mid-80s, early 90s, New Zealand's been liberalising, opening up, trying to reduce regulation, tariffs, these sorts of things, the typical Washington consensus. Why don't we just do more of that? Won't that get us there?
Well, I think the problem with doing more of that is that we already score very well within the world on those things, and it's not working for us. I think it has worked for us. We had an economy when in the 1980s, which was needed to be liberalised. But having been liberalised and now running relatively efficiently as an economy, we have to shift to be able to do those things that give us better incomes. And that shift is difficult because there are some specific obstacles to success in exporting these differentiated goods and services that can provide high value. And we need to overcome those specific obstacles.
And they are?
Well, in the case of our companies that are going offshore, the fundamental problem is that New Zealand is such a small country and we're distant. So if you're trying to sell a product on a global market, you've generally innovated, so it'll be different. You have this challenge of having to take a new product into a new market, which is always a very difficult thing to do. And then you confront that problem when you're a very small company, because in New Zealand you can't build these companies to a large size before you have to go international. And then the challenge is that we haven't really recognised how big an obstacle that is, and we have a more difficult obstacle because of our small size and distance than other countries, but we've done less in this country to support our new exporters of these high-value products and services than other countries have. And so we lack sufficient quantity of high-level skills, we lack capital, we even lack some of the knowledge that we should have in the economy to be able to do this successfully.
So how could we find those skills and get that knowledge and do that stuff?
Well, some of it's through selected foreign direct investment, through migration, through focusing our own educational efforts here on where we have shortages, attracting capital from residential housing and less productive domestic investment into some of these more productive international investments. What we find is that if you look at the top 100 technology exporting companies in New Zealand, those companies have an average revenue per person of $285,000. So those are highly productive activities, and if we can be successful in those things, then we can build a high-value economy.
Now, you talk in the report about shifting resources from low productivity into high productivity type industries. How can you do that?
Well, I think that's something we don't have the specifics of how to go about that now. But one of the things we're proud of in New Zealand is that it's so easy to start a business here. And if you look at our startup rates in New Zealand, they're very high. But then if you peel another layer off that onion, what you find is that they're largely individuals who want to work from home doing service-type businesses that are extremely low productivity. So, that thing that we congratulate ourselves on being so open in the ability to start a business may actually be constraining us. What we need is larger businesses, because larger businesses are more productive generally. They have professional management, they have economies of scale and so on. So there are some choices that we've made that have led us to places that we probably would, with the benefit of hindsight, would rather not be in.
So what type of responses could government take to try and improve that?
Well, on that specific one, policies that would encourage firm aggregation would be quite helpful. Now, I don't know exactly what those would be, but I do know that Singapore has had to confront a similar sort of issue. So, one of our next steps is to have a look and see how Singapore's done it.
And any ideas from a distance?
Not really on that particular one, but the idea of trying to shift into more productive sectors is something that government is really after. Not so much on the productivity, but if you just look at their policy, they want to increase exports as a percentage of GDP up to 40%. And what we would argue is that at the same time we should be trying to increase the value of those exports.
So what's the response been so far from the government? Because on the face of it, the things they've done since they've been in power is to look at doing more mining, extractive stuff, looking at encouraging more use of irrigation on dairy farming, which doesn't seem to be moving towards a higher productivity, higher value stuff. It just seems to be doing more of what we've done. What's your sense of whether they're really interested in this?
Well, I think there's a debate going on about to what extent the country should move beyond economic liberalisation or the Washington Consensus in terms of economic strategy. And I'm encouraged that we may end up doing more tilting the playing field in favour of our companies. Minister Brownlee has said that government is in strong agreement with the conclusions of our Gold is Not a Strategy report. So I'm looking forward to some policies that move the country in the direction that we think it should be moved in.
Can you think of any examples of businesses who are heading in that direction of being more high productivity, more high value, internationalised, looking outwards, getting up to a decent scale?
Well, I think that Fisher & Paykel Healthcare would be a good example. It does take a long time to be successful, and there are a reasonably large number of companies that are getting some scale. If you look at that TIN 100 that I mentioned before, I can't recall the latest figures, but the 2009 figures indicated that collectively that 100 firms was exporting $5.1 billion of exports. Now, that represents about 10% of our total exports of goods and services, and that 10% makes them third after dairy and tourism in terms of the size of New Zealand exporters. So it's already happening. We just need to make it happen more quickly and more effectively.
What about the risk, though, that as commodity prices rise and New Zealand stands aside from the race to the bottom devaluation seen overseas, that a rise in the currency kills off our non-commodity exporters?
I think that is a risk, and you can see that the impact of currency fluctuations on our exporters is damaging, and as you say, it's driven by the sort of dairy and other commodity cycle. So we do see that as an issue. I think the question is, what do you do about that? And you either need to find a way to reduce the volatility of the currency, which would mean changing the Reserve Bank guidelines, or alternatively, you find a way to somehow insulate your exporters from the effects of that. Potentially by offering some kind of a financial instrument to help them to manage long-term currency volatility.
Like?
Well, a long-term hedge would be an example. At the moment you can't buy a hedge longer than about a year. Not really sure why that is. So one of the things we want to look into is, what are the prospects for offering a longer-term hedge?
Excellent. Rick Boven, the Director of New Zealand Institute, here for another in our series of double-shot interviews. I'm Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz.